Yay, and Ellen has a copy of the book. Thank you for that. All right, let me get my intro. All right, well, welcome everyone to a special Thursday virtual author event. If you've been following our calendar recently, we have been doing most of our virtual events on Tuesdays, but because of some stuff going on in the store, we changed tonight, Thursday, to virtual. My name is Julie and I'm the events manager at Roundabout Books. So a couple things before we get started. I want to remind everyone to check our event calendar online or on Facebook to find out about upcoming events and book clubs. For example, next Tuesday, I will be chatting with Thea Prieto about her new book, From the Caves. She is a Portland-based author. And then on February 15th, this is very exciting, we are welcoming Newbery Award-winning author Donna Barba Higuera for her novel, The Last Cuentista. It just won the Newbery. So very exciting stuff. And as some of you might know, we are expanding and renovating the store. If you're not getting our newsletter already, you should. So I just want to remind everyone to check our website for details on days we might have modified hours. If we're not open in the store, we will always have our online store available with our red bench pickup or other options to be able to get that book that you absolutely need. So make sure to visit roundaboutbookshop.com for details. And then I just want to remind everyone with Zoom to make sure and stay muted while the author is speaking so we don't get any feedback. And then of course, we will open it up for questions. We can see you on video and we can also unmute you if you want to ask the question personally. If you're on a cell phone or are not able to unmute, please feel free to drop it into the chat box and I will be reading those questions. And then this event is being recorded for our YouTube channel, which also has recordings of all of our events since May of 2020. So tonight, we are so pleased to welcome Bend author Kerry Chaput. Am I saying that right?
It's Chaput.
Chaput. Thank you. Yeah. I should have checked.
No, that's okay. Everyone says it that way.
Kerry's previous books, The Darkness We Carry and My Boring Life, take place in the Pacific Northwest, but her new book, Daughter of the King, takes us all the way to France in 1661. One reader said, "This fact-based story certainly grabs your attention and imagination. The characters are so real that you find yourself right in the story. A wonderful plot that has you guessing the next step. Unpredictable. I thoroughly enjoyed this book and recommend it to everyone." So Kerry, we are so excited to hear more about your new book, Daughter of the King.
Thanks, Julie. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. So Daughter of the King is historical fiction, as everything I write is historical fiction. And the book is set in 1661 France. And it follows the life of Isabelle Colette. And she is a 19-year-old Protestant living in Catholic France. And at this time, it was an incredibly dangerous thing to live as a Protestant in Catholic France. They were harassed, tortured, imprisoned, killed, all under the name of trying to convert everyone to Catholicism. So they were trying to harass and intimidate them into conversion. It wasn't working very well because the Protestants were kind of like the early rebels and they were standing their ground. And so the harassment kept escalating. And so Isabelle has basically lived this life of just, survival. And she's lost family members, she's lost friends, she has lost members of her community. And her mother and her are just trying to survive. And so she's in this world where she cannot be true to her faith. She has to hide everything that was Protestant at the time. If you were praying, if you were celebrating marriage, baptism, any of that had to be done in secret because it wasn't allowed and it was punishable by jail or death. And so she's trying to just live this life that's truly impossible. And through a series of events, her life gets even harder. And she's basically ends up with an impossible choice. When she is attacked by a nobleman, she has to decide, because she basically fights this man off, but injures him significantly. And so she has to either stay true to her faith and face the consequences, which could be death or imprisonment, or she can save herself from the Catholics by becoming one of them. And by doing that, she could become what was called a daughter of the king. And a kind priest gave her this option and said, if you want me to help you, you have to convert to Catholicism and move to Canada. And so she makes that choice and she starts this new life, and she gets on a new quest to basically discover that freedom means maybe something different than what she thought it meant. So a little bit of history and background that will add some information to this. At this time in France, the king had a problem. He was running out of money. He was building Versailles. He was using all of France's funds to fund his vanity projects, his, the wars that he wanted to fight, the greed he had going on. And Canada had the beaver trade, which was making him a lot of money. And the problem was that the population at the time was dwindling. It was almost entirely men. There were no women. They were just early settlers. And, that's a problem to have all men and no women. That was a problem for the settlers. So the king knew, we have to get women over there. And what's really neat about this program is they didn't force women. They didn't put them into a mail order bride situation. They told them, we want the women of France to know that Canada is a place that you can thrive and be safe and want to move to. So they took a different approach, and they went into poverty-stricken areas of Paris and Normandy and the western coast of France, and they found women who were destitute. And they were orphans. They had no future, no prospects. They were in servitude. And they found these women and said, I'm going to offer you a new life in Canada. And if you do this, we will pay for your passage. We will give you a dowry. We will give you a farm once you get there. You get land. And then what's really amazing is they said, there is so many men right now to the ratio of the few women that the women are going to get to choose their spouses. And I read this when I was researching, and I was like, back it up. What? This really happened? I had to reread it a couple times. And so in the 17th century, these women from complete and utter poverty got to go to Canada, and they were holding interviews. It was basically 17th century speed dating, right? And they had men come through and they were interviewing them with questions. And then they chose their spouse out of this group. And then this is where it gets really interesting. What the king decided, and this was a law of Canada, or New France is what it was called at the time, that the women could get married out of the church. A notary could sign them off on a marriage, and it was legal. So for this Catholic run colony, where the church had their hand in everything, every single thing about this colony was run by the Catholic Church, all the laws, everything, Catholic Church. So for the king to say, you can get married by a notary so that you can break your marriage contract is beyond comprehension. It's so amazing to me that these women were given this amount of power at this time. And so it was their choice at some point if they wished to get married in the church. And many women did cancel their marriage contracts if they weren't happy, if they felt unsafe, because they really didn't know these men. They asked them questions like, do you have a fireplace, and do you own land, and do you have a hunting license? And so reading these stories of these women, these daughters of the king, it's just mind-blowing what power they had, and also what influence they had on North American history. And it's not something you find in the history books very often, as we often find that these stories of women kind of get washed out. And these 800 women, it was a span of about 8 or 10 years, these 800 women did this program. They birthed a nation, truly. So if you are a descendant from Canadians, you are highly likely to be a descendant of a fille de roi, which is the daughter of the king. And if you're a French Canadian, you are definitely from one of these 800 women. So how I found this all out was, my husband is French Canadian, and this was several years ago. I just decided I was going to do an ancestry search and find out where in France his family was from. And I found these women that all had this fleur-de-lis symbol next to their name on the ancestry page, started researching more about them. And I just was blown away by these stories. And I found 33 of these women in my husband's line. And there's probably more that I can't even comprehend where to find them, but pretty readily I found 33 on both sides of his family. And so knowing that my daughters came from women with this amount of kind of fortitude and strength, it is really, it made writing the book extra special.
That is so cool. And I love that. I mean, you say here's based on a true story. So when you're going and doing that kind of research though, when do you did you ever kind of hit a wall of you couldn't find out more just because the records are so old, what is and isn't digitized, etc., like that maybe made you have to like pivot in what you were working on?
I had the opposite problem.
Oh.
I had such a volume of information that my first draft was, Ellen will tell you, my first draft was like a history book, because I was trying to fit all this stuff in. The records from Quebec and Montreal and the original French Canada are amazing. Mm-hmm. They kept incredible records. I was even able to pull up an original copy of a marriage contract from like 1665 or something. And, it's completely frayed or whatever, but they bring it up and you can translate it from French to English. So I don't even think after 2 years of doing research, I think I barely touched the surface with the volume of information that's out there. So, and I would say that that's pretty standard for all of the books that I've researched. There is no limit. There's only a rabbit hole, and you have to stop yourself and pull yourself out at some point and say, okay, we need to not spend 2 hours researching how shoes were made. We need to get back to the writing and not let that kind of pull you down.
So is that where you decided to make this more of a series, or was that like, because it says book 1 in Defying the Crown series. And I think that's always really attractive to readers when you get a book and you love it. And then you can say, oh, I already know there's going to be more. So what kind of made you think this needs to be a series?
It wasn't until I finished the first book and I realized that there's so much more to tell. And I feel like most authors will tell you this, that you can finish a book and if that story's done or not, because that character kind of still nudges at you after that first book and there's more to that story. And with this kind of book, we're bringing in persecution of the Huguenots. We're bringing in, the world of Catholic France. We're bringing in New France and Canada and the Native Americans. I mean, there's so much there that I have to keep writing it. And so I actually I signed with my publisher for one book, but they were interested in the series, but I just recently signed for the second book. So that's going to be coming out in March of 2023.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about that a little bit then. So your first 2 books were self-published, yes? Mm-hmm. And now you've been picked up by a publisher, a small one. So yep. How has that been different? It sounds like Ellen is still working with you. So like they're still, a small enough publisher that they're not maybe taking the manuscript and, wanting to change it drastically.
Right. Well, Ellen will probably be with me as long as she'll tolerate me. She's kind of been my first. She was the very first person to ever read anything that I wrote. Aww. And she gives such amazing feedback that I give my work to her before I even give it to beta readers or critique partners or anything. And so by the time my publisher gets it, it's usually been through 1 or 2 editors, 3 critique partners, and a minimum of 3 to 4 beta readers.
Okay. Yeah.
But in regards to kind of the self-published route to the indie press route, I'm glad that I did the way that I did, because, as an indie author, you are not an author. You are everything. Mm-hmm. You are marketing expert. You are PR, you are branding, you are cover designer if you want, but I have someone else do my covers. You have to really figure it out. And I will tell you, it is an experience, because you do what you love, which is to write the book, and then to find out how much work it is to publish it, you're like, okay, we can do this, you know, and you just have to take it in pieces. And so my first book, I didn't do hardly any marketing on. I was just learning writing, let alone how do you market and do all that other stuff. So I learned kind of a crash course over those first 2 books. I learned about NetGalley. I learned about ARCs. I learned about reaching out to bookstagrammers. You learn all of these things. I learned about formatting, which is my least favorite thing in the whole world. It's the worst. I have my husband do that because he's really good at that stuff. But so by the time I got to my small press, I wasn't overwhelmed. And I can see an author not having that experience, getting this information. I mean, you sign your contract and then you're getting emails like almost within 24 hours. And you're going, okay, what does this all mean? You know, and it's really overwhelming. And it wasn't overwhelming for me because I already done all this stuff by myself. Now I had someone who's with me in the process and I could bounce ideas off of and everything. And they help me. It's collaborative. All of the marketing, a lot of it still falls on you. But I mean, I feel like even my friends that are traditionally published with some of the bigger houses, same thing. They're still doing their own marketing. And so I'm glad that as I kind of move up in this world, that I've had the experience to learn a lot of this myself. So I understand kind of the back end of it.
Yeah, very cool. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about your other 2 books? So I just want to remind everyone, we have copies of Daughter of the King at the bookstore, and we have copies of My Boring Life, and we are going to get some copies of The Darkness We Carry.
Yes. Yeah. So my first book was Darkness We Carry. So I'm going to be bringing some of these into Roundabout. And this is basically a historical thriller, which, you know, your first book out, you're kind of just writing the book that calls to you without thinking about genre and all that other stuff. So it's a dual timeline, kind of 1990s is the modern timeline back to 1890s Maine. And a girl leaves San Francisco to go to a family plot of land out on a island in Maine that has a lighthouse. And she knows nothing about her past. She's going through a hard time in her own life, but she's always known about this sort of mysterious lighthouse that her family was involved in. And as she's there, she is sort of healing from her own life while also learning secrets about her past as she's there through some different things that come up. And it's very twisty and thriller-esque, and lots of secrets come out. So that's Darkness We Carry.
Well, forgive me for in the intro mislabeling this one as Pacific Northwest. For some reason, when I read Bridger Island, I think I was thinking Bainbridge Island in Washington.
Oh no, I was living in Montana at the time. Oh, I was writing, looking out at
Washington.
Yeah. No, I was looking at the Bridger Mountains in Montana as I was writing it. So I was like, I'm just gonna call it that. So, but you're right. The majority of my writing is set in the Pacific Northwest. The book that I am currently pitching right now, actually, the opening is Bend during the Great Depression. So I'm very drawn to the Pacific Northwest for my books.
Yeah. All right. So then, tell us a little bit about My Boring Life, which of course, I love the title.
Yeah. It's so, okay. So anyone who doesn't know about My Boring Life, it is, there we go. It is basically humorous, kind of YA, kind of women's fiction. And I guess it's YA. It's coming of age, and it's titled My Boring Life because it's set in the town of Boring, which is outside of Portland, and is a very, very tiny town. And the year is 1969, and the character is Gavinia, and she has basically kind of failed out of her first year of college at Columbia. And she has to return home because her brother survived a pretty serious injury in Vietnam. She's failing out. Everything's kind of falling apart. So she goes home to Boring, Oregon. Her family is this outrageous, inappropriate family from Manchester, England. And I grew up in a British family, so it's very much kind of inspired by my wacky family. And the family doesn't like to deal with anything serious. So they drink, they laugh, they make inappropriate jokes. And she's kind of struggling through what's happening with her brother, who's getting worse after his injury, and her failed attempt at being a writer at, it wasn't Columbia at the time because women were not allowed in Columbia in 1969. It was Columbia's sister school. But it's her kind of coming of age that first year after college coming back home and not really being very happy about it.
Yeah. Interesting. I like that these are so, I mean, they feel like three very different books, and yet you seem to have kind of, you know, strong female central characters, you know, maybe breaking some molds. Going back to Daughter of the King. So let me ask you this, and I hope it doesn't give away anything. Your character in particular, but maybe just the women at the time, were they really converted to Catholicism, or was it just in label only?
It's a really good question. So, of course, the documents will say that they were all Catholic, right? In fact, the documents, I could not even find.
Hold on just 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry, we had just somebody come in and I had to mute them. Let me fix you, Kerry. There, sorry about that.
That's okay. And what was interesting about these records is that I am fairly convinced that several of the Daughters of the King that I found personally in my husband's family, they were from La Rochelle. And at the time, that's where the book said, at the time, it was hugely Protestant, which is why it was such an important place for the Catholics to kind of lay down the law. And there were quite a few women that would have had to convert. So the records don't really indicate that they did, but I'm fairly certain, just based off of kind of what was happening at the time, that they did. And I wrote the book really with the idea that, okay, if you were in this situation and you're literally forced with life and death and you have to give up your faith, how would that look like to you? Would you be able to jump into that new life? And I found that really interesting. And that is definitely part of her struggle. She does adopt it. And she does say, okay, because she's had questions her whole life. Like, do we really need to be tortured? This can't be it. Because Protestants were told this is your fate and you can't change it. And they were just supposed to kind of not even fight back. I mean, they were very passive about it. It was like, okay, this is my life. And so I wrote it as, yes, she did convert, and she makes a very valiant effort to become a Catholic, but she has so much anger towards this world that treated her this way, that how does that anger start to bubble up over time? And how does your real true belief, you can't really swallow that, I don't think. I think it's going to come up in some way or another. And so that is part of her journey and part of her struggle.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, because once she's in Canada, you know, it's not like the French government and monarchy can really know what they're doing, but
right
then, yeah, who is telling on you, or who's watching? Yeah, watching you.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the colony too is they didn't believe there were any Protestants or Huguenots at all, because it was completely Catholic, right? Anyone that was coming from France was Catholic. So there wasn't the same level of scrutiny and harassment going on in Canada as there was in France. But you have to believe that there were people in secret still practicing. And that's where I really kind of was drawn to the idea of, you know, she's kind of having to still live a little bit of a secret life. And I will say that a little teaser for book 2, book 1 is all about Isabelle saving herself. She's on this internal journey, this external journey. She's trying to find a way to survive in this life. Book 2, she's going to save her people. She's now kind of on the next phase of her journey where she's got a little bit of survivor guilt, that she knows that she's living in this, because the women, they've compared the women that lived in Canada at the time and their French counterparts. The ones in Canada had longer lifespans, they had higher fertility rates, everything about their life was higher quality. And so there's this guilt that she carries, that people are still back there suffering, and how do you move forward knowing that? And so she decides to kind of take a step and do something about that.
Yeah. Very interesting. So I know you said before we started you had a funny story about the bookstore.
Yeah, I do.
I'd love to hear that.
It's actually an adorable. I think it's an adorable story. For my birthday this year, my husband, he hacked into my Goodreads page, my Goodreads account, and he pulled up my want to read shelf and he took it to Roundabout and said, here's what my wife wants. Can you help me pick out? She's into historical fiction. Can you help me pick this out? And the bookseller said, that's great, let's do this. And she walked around the store with him and pulled out all these books and piled them up and was like, let's go through it, and looked at my whole shelf to decide, okay, these are the kind of books that I think she likes. This is what we have. And these are the most popular. And she wrapped him everything for him and everything. And I was on a trip and I came home the day of my birthday and I had these 3 stacks of books, one for my husband and one from each of my daughters, all wrapped from Roundabout, like perfectly curated for me. It was like the best gift ever.
I love that. Anybody who's on this right now or watching it later, we would love to do that for you. We absolutely would. The booksellers, we just hired 3 new booksellers too, who come with just a plethora of, different reading from the rest of us. So it's very exciting to hear what people have been reading. And yeah, we love doing that kind of stuff. So I think we should go ahead and we'll open it up to questions from our guests. So if you are familiar with Zoom and you know how to use the hand raise function, feel free to do that, because then I can unmute you specifically. You can also, like I said, type it into the chat, or I can't see everybody, or you can just kind of feel free to unmute yourself, but we'll try not to have too many people do that at one time. So yeah, feel free to ask some questions while people may be forming those. I'm going to pick on Ellen and have her unmute and just talk about working with indie authors. I mean, just kind of watching people's writing, like maybe unfold. What's that like?
Well, it's one of the things I feel so lucky to get to be able to be on, such a journey with a writer, and that's I mean I've loved reading Kerry's work, and over time just see you, Kerry, evolve and develop on the page. It's extraordinary. And so I feel, and I know, Julie, you do the same kind of work. It's the best. It's one of the best jobs I've ever had. Do
you still get that kind of like maybe surge or butterflies, whatever you want to classify it, when even if your name's not listed, because I know sometimes authors, however, they write the acknowledgements or XYZ, but that when you see that book on the shelf that you're like, I know I worked on that, like, do you still get that little feeling?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, I love that. So Kerry, I guess maybe I'll ask you that too, because what does it feel like to walk in, because I saw you take your picture with My Boring Life at Roundabout one day, but what does it feel like to see your book on a bookshelf?
Oh, it is probably one of the best feelings of this entire journey, because, writers, we obsess over our manuscripts for years sometimes, and you want to make it the best that you can. You want to keep going. And there's this kind of protective feeling over it. So when you finally get to the place where you let that go and say, I'm putting this out there, I'm welcoming, reviews, good, bad, and everything in between, and welcoming people into this world, it's this really kind of precarious feeling, because you're like, you're putting your emotions out there and you put your heart into these books, but then you're like, I did that. Like, you can pick up this thing in your hand that you have spent hours, endless hours, living in this person's, this character's mind, and you can now hold it in your hand and you can see it on a bookshelf. And it is, I think it's probably the best feeling of the entire journey. Like, you get the cover, that's pretty exciting. You sign your contract, that's amazing. But seeing that book on a bookshelf, that's like bucket list stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes years. I know from your bio, you went and did other things and did maybe what more people consider like the responsible thing, have a normal 9-to-5 job, not the creative thing that's sometimes more of a passion project. And I know a lot of people over the years, self-publishing has had its ebb and flow of, there are books out there that, man, would I love to re-edit those books. But one of the things that self-publishing offers is you can do it without waiting for someone else to give you permission to get your work out into the world. Exactly. And if it sells 50 copies, that's still 50 people who read what you put your blood, sweat, and tears into. Molly put a question in the chat. First, she says, I have been blessed to read all of Kerry's work. Can you explain your background and why you've chosen strong women as your focal point in all your books? As maybe, I guess, opposed to like a family, that kind of thing.
Okay, so first of all, Molly, hi. Molly was the first person in the whole world that I said the words, I want to be a writer.
Aww.
I was 24, 25, I think. We were living in San Diego, working together, and I had started Darkness with Kerry back then. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't that at the time. I think it ended up being like a novella at the time or something. And I didn't tell anyone I was writing this book. And Molly and I went out to sushi one night, and I was like, I'm writing a book. You're the only one I'm telling. And she's like, what? And I, of course, put that book away for 10, 12 years or whatever. But I love that here we are now. She's read all of my books, and years ago, she's the first one that I said I want to be a writer. So we love having those friends. The female character, I think a lot of it comes from, I grew up with history surrounding me. My dad was a US history teacher, and he was not your typical teacher. He was loud, he was animated, he pushed boundaries, he pushed kids to think. And we had our he had his honors US history class in our living room every Thursday night. And they would debate. They would pick a topic, he'd say, go research, come back with an opinion, and we're gonna debate. So I was like 8 years old, hiding behind the couch, listening to these debates. And I was just fascinated by the stories of history. At 8 years old, I recognized they were all men they were talking about. They were all men. They were all about the men that made contributions, the men that conquered places, the men that wrote laws. And I'm at 8 years old, I was like, were there no women in history? Like what was happening there? And then I remember also at 12 years old, I read The Diary of Anne Frank. Was the first book that I read outside of school. It was like a, Saturday, and I just decided I want to pick up a book. And I was changed at 12 years old because I went, wait a minute, books can have people that look like me and sound like me and think like me. It was a game changer for me when I read that. And so I think my experiences of feeling like women's stories have gotten washed out of the history books and their contributions have often been forgotten. I like bringing those stories forward. That really drives me in writing historical women's fiction. And I love strong female characters. When I read books, that's what I want. That's all I want to read, is these powerful, strong women who overcome kind of impossible situations. And that's partly why I enjoy reading historical fiction. I like big, epic adventure stories. And here's the other thing. Just this week, my publisher asked me to come up with some other comps for some marketing purposes. And I went through to look, I went through Goodreads, Amazon, BookBub, everywhere I could think of. And I typed in adventure stories with women protagonists. Do you know how little we have out there? It's all male dominated adventure stories. And I'm like, women were running through the forest. They were running away from wolves. Like, they were doing all the same stuff. So I think it's just really wanting to round out our idea of what history looks like.
Yeah, definitely. What is I'm going to forget it now. It's a recent book, and the lead character is a female aviator, which the gentleman in the bookstore who told me about it actually said aviatrix, which I thought was really cute. Phil, that he said that, but I was just like, but he said it's one of the best books that he's read.
I love it.
He's a former pilot, but at the same time, he's like, it's a female character, and I loved it. And I was like, good. I'm so happy to, that he like, I think he was almost surprised himself, but it was like,
Yeah.
why did that? Yeah. And I'm going to think of the name of it, but
is it Sisters in something?
no, why am I can literally see the title. I swear the author's first name is Maggie.
I'm not sure.
I'm going to look for it. There's a couple other comments in the chat. So hold on just 1 second here. Dorothy says, I read an arc and loved it. I admired how ingenious and bold the women were. Also the imagery Kerry uses, the longer the book, the better.
Oh, thank you.
And Ellen, because she can sneak in this kind of knowing it, what led you to choose present tense in Daughter of the King, which, a lot of people will, that can be a harder one to write in.
I think I've always kind of just naturally been drawn to that as a reader. And so it was a natural fit for me. But in regards to this particular book, it was a bit of a choice to do that because there is so much immediacy that is needed, especially in that first half of the book. You are living through hell really with her as a Protestant in France. And I wanted the reader to feel that, like her heart racing and this is happening right now and she could die right now. I wanted the reader to have that feeling, as opposed to like the one that I'm pitching right now that's set in Bend during the Great Depression. I loved the idea of, I did it past tense because I wanted the feel of someone looking back on their life and recounting this story that she had gone through. So I feel like the first person here really worked for that danger around every corner feeling.
Yeah, excellent. So just in case anyone's wondering, it's Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead.
Oh, that's on my TBR. That's I hear it's amazing.
This gentleman in the bookstore took me aside to tell me it was one of the best things that he's ever read. So
I've heard several people say that. It's actually within the next 1 or 2 books I'm reading, so I'll let you know.
Yeah, he just loved it. Renee put a comment in with a question, says, I love all your books. How do you find time to do all you do?
Hi, Renee. I always say I don't have many skills in life, but my one skill that I'm excellent at is time management, and it has served me well. So I work full time in healthcare, and I have 2 little kids, obviously husband, a life outside of writing. And so my only time that I can commit fully to writing is first thing in the morning. So I start at 4:30, and that's when I do my writing. And I realized in grad school that that's when I learn best. It's when my mind is sharpest. I used to get up and study at 4:30 in the morning because that's when I would take it all in. By the end of the day, it's trash. I got nothing going on up there. So it translates well for writing. It's my most creative time. So I start at 4:30, sometimes 5. And on a good day, I'll get 2 to 3 hours in, depending on if the kids have school or not. And on a not great day, I'll maybe get an hour in. But I do it every day without fail, short of some catastrophe happening. And for me, it's the process of showing up every day. I don't care how many words I get in. I don't have word count goals. I just show up and I write. And I'm also, for those of you who aren't into the writing aspect of things, there's generally 2 kinds of writers. There's plotters and pantsers. And the plotters have everything planned out and they have a whole outline and they're following it by a T. I am not that way. I am a pantser. Whatever comes to my mind is what I write. So I sit down at 4:30 in the morning, have my coffee, it's dark, it's quiet, it's perfect. And I look at a blank page and go, all right, well, what's going to happen? Let's see. And it's an adventure for me too. It's like reading on steroids because I'm like, where is this going to take me? And what works for me about that is that I'm never afraid to write the wrong thing. I'm never afraid of having to erase chapters and characters or whatever. So it's the adventure of it for me every morning that I enjoy that keeps that routine fun for me. And it works. And honestly, I finished my rough drafts in 4 months without fail. Every time it's 4 months. And that is writing on average an hour and a half a day. That's it.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a quick turnaround.
It's quick, but because when you're a pantser, your edits are a nightmare. So my editing phase is a lot longer.
That's true. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I will say that I think the majority of the people I work with are also pantsers.
Yeah.
As am I.
We need you. We need editors that way.
Molly had another question. So each time I read one of your books, they're so different. We talked about, there's just, you're kind of all over the place, which is great. You're going to find readers that way. Where do you find your ideas and how are you inspired?
So the different books, I have to admit, I think has just come out from being a new writer. You write what calls to you. And then as you get farther in, and this is what happens when you sign with the publisher and some other things, you have to start thinking about your author brand and you go, oh, okay, well, that's not something I've thought about before. And so I am honing in a little bit closer on kind of the stories I really want to tell and sticking a little closer to that. Like historical thriller, as fun as that was to write, that's not my vibe now. I'm not going to do that moving forward. But as far as ideas, I am lucky that I have the opposite problem of writer's block. I had a book idea come to me in my dreams 2 nights ago, and I woke up at 2 a.m. and had to email myself because I was like, don't lose it. And so I actually keep a drive folder of all of those things that come up, and I just have I think I have 12 ideas for books that have called to me over the last however many months. And what happens is they all kind of compete with each other as I'm writing and another book, and these will just one will start to kind of pop up above the others. And then once I have that idea, I just keep thinking on it while I'm editing whatever project I have. And that idea starts to roll into other things and the character starts to develop. And then the moment I get the hook, that's when I know I can start writing. So I always have this background of several different ideas that I want to do. They're all historical. They're all about women. They're generally coming of age, although I do love some adult women's fiction. That's where I'm struggling right now is I kind of write between YA and women's fiction. So I'm trying to kind of find where in that I fit, but I still love both of those genres. So, but it will always be women, it will always be history, very drawn to the Pacific Northwest for settings. And I'm getting more into the, with the exception of the Daughter of the King series, I will for the most part probably stay a little closer historical fiction like 1900 and later, because that's kind of what I'm really into right now. I love the Great Depression. I cannot pass up a Great Depression story when I see it on a bookshelf. It's just my favorite time period. So so that's kind of where I'm going from here.
Yeah. Have you read any Jane Kirkpatrick?
No.
That is, so she's a local author who has
Okay.
She always finds a real person and then goes off on this like
I love that.
beautiful epic, what was their life like? Dorothy says, this has been a great conversation. I have to leave. Thanks, Kerry, for asking me to read your book. I'm looking forward to book number 2. Thank you so much for joining us, Dorothy. So before we wrap up, if we do have any other questions or comments, please let me know. But one of the things that I love asking, especially on our virtual events, is tell us, and you did mention in Diary of Anne Frank, but tell us a couple of books that inspired you, like maybe as a kid leaning into your, teens and that kind of thing. And then 2 or 3 books besides your own that you would recommend everyone read.
Okay. I have to admit, I was not a voracious reader as a child. And I think that was because middle grade stories didn't really appeal to me. I wanted to read adult stories, right? So I really settled into reading in my early 20s. So as a teen, I didn't read a whole lot outside of school. But over the years, I can say kind of some of my top books that still really mean a lot to me are Memoirs of a Geisha. That was the first book that felt like saying goodbye to a friend when I finished it. That was I was like, I've never had that feeling before. I read 5 pages a night because I didn't want it to end, but that was an amazing feeling. Another one of my all-time favorite books that I actually quoted in my wedding vows was The Power of One by Bryce Courtenay, which most people are not familiar with this book. He's an Australian author, and I think it was like early 90s. Have you read it, Julie?
I haven't, but I will say this, resurged in popularity when I worked at Barnes and Noble, but that is one of those ones that is like an evergreen book.
Mhm.
When someone is like stumped or I've read everything, have you read this? And they'll be like, no, and it's, go read this. I feel like I either started it or I'm aware enough of it, but I will admit I don't think I've actually read it.
It's amazing because it's told from the perspective in the opening of a young boy, and the writing is so sophisticated and adult, but it's from the perspective of a young boy and how he would see the world. And then as he grows, his narrative changes, and so the author changes the way that he writes to reflect the age. And it's not a book I would ever normally pick up because it's about a boy growing up in South Africa during World War II, and he wants to be a boxer. And there's something, it has kind of a, the story's not at all the same, but it has a bit of a To Kill a Mockingbird feel to it, in that very simplistic story that has so much emotional weight to it. So I love, that's one of my all-time favorite books. What else? I would say the book that I tell everyone to read is The Nightingale. Kristen Hanna is my favorite. Anything that she drops, I'm like, I'm getting it the day it comes out, I'm getting it in hardcover. It's going on my shelf. I love her. So yes, Nightingale is way up there for me. All the Light We Cannot See as well is a beautiful story. I actually read a lot of outside of World War II, but those just happen to be kind of ones that I really love. I wish I could look at my bookshelf here. Speaking of Great Depression stories, This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger is way up on my list as well. I thought that was just a stunning book. And then kind of on the fun side, the book my recent read that I tell everyone to look into is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Oh, I loved that book so much. We did it for our Not Your Average, which is kind of a YA themed book club. January of last year. God, I can't believe it started 2022. I put that book down and I was wrecked. I couldn't do anything for like 3 weeks. I was just like, nothing will. Well, and I listened to the audio too, which is just beautiful. The person who narrates it just did such a good job. I love audiobooks, but I was just like, what has happened to my life? I can't read something else. Like I know
you go on a book hangover afterwards because
I had a total book hangover. Absolute book hangover.
I would say that one and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo both kind of wrecked me, where I was like, I can't read anything after this because it's so good.
Yeah. Well, excellent. I will say too that Ellen put something in the chat, which I will just read out, but we can always share, in the event. A one-woman play about women supporting women written in 1916. It's called Trifles by Susan Glaspell. So that's, and I know that, theater like that is so powerful and moving too, one woman play. So if anyone, again, if you have any additional questions or comments for Kerry, if you have a book that you think the rest of us should read, I wish I had it right here by my hand, and I'm so mad at myself that I didn't. But the book I read this last weekend while I was at the coast, which comes out in April, is called Singing Lessons for the Stylish Canary, and it's historical fiction, France in the 1850s, and I do recommend it.
Okay.
She will be at the store in May. So
nice.
And as always, I'm so appreciative of everyone who took the time to come tonight to support Kerry, by extension supporting Roundabout, and your continued support of our bookstore during this 2 years of upheaval. I can't believe it's been that long. Our store would not be here without you and authors like you, Kerry. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts for supporting Roundabout, the little shop around the corner, and just making sure that indie bookstores stay in everyone's lives. If you're not local to Bend, please buy Kerry's book and all of your books from indie bookstores. We have to keep them going. It is imperative for the future readers of America.
Yes.
So with that, I think we'll say good night, but thank you so much for being here. Stop by the store and pick up a copy of her books. If you want to, you can call ahead. Maybe we can have her sign them for people. We'll figure all of that out. But once we're all back in the store again in person after the renovation, Kerry, we will definitely have you in person in our new space for your next however many books you write.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for having me. And I love Roundabout. I love how you support local authors and give us a space, like you said, to see our dream come true of seeing our book on a shelf. And thank you everyone for showing up tonight. I really appreciate it.
It's so amazing to see new books. I just love it. It's the best. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Happy reading. Be well.
Thank you.
All right. I'll stop that.